There was a man who never spoke more than he had to, not because he had nothing to say, but because once, a single sentence had cost him a friendship that never came back. This is the story of Elias, a story about the words we choose and the ones we can never take back. In a small town nestled near the hills, where the morning smelled of pine and fresh sawdust, there lived a carpenter named Elias. His hands could turn a rough plank into a chair that felt like it belonged in a palace. People came from nearby villages just to own one of his creations. But Elias was known for something else too, a tongue as sharp as his chisel. If it's true, he often said, then it deserves to be said. Whether it hurts or not is not my concern. He believed this made him honest, strong, someone who didn't waste time on soft words and gentle lies. His wife Miriam saw it differently. Every evening, as she watched him return from the workshop, tired but proud, she would gently remind him, Elias, truth without kindness is not honesty, it's just cruelty, wearing a mask. He would smile, kiss her forehead, and brush it off. The world doesn't need more comforting lies, Miriam. It needs people who speak plainly. She never argued further, but her eyes always carried a quiet worry, as if she already knew where this road would lead. Elias's closest friend was a young man named Samuel, the son of the town's baker, but a boy with dreams that stretched far beyond flour and bread. Samuel had spent months sketching plans in a worn leather notebook, a small woodworking shop right at the edge of the market square, where he and Elias could build furniture together and sell it to travelers passing through. One evening, Samuel arrived at the workshop, breathless with excitement, notebook clutched tightly in his hands. Elias, I've finally finished it. Look, the shop, the shelves, even where we'd placed the window, so the morning light hits the wood just right. His eyes shone the way only a young dreamer's eyes can shine, not yet touched by disappointment, still believing the world would meet his hope halfway. Elias took the notebook, flipped through a few pages, and let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, but close enough to sting. Samuel, he said, setting the notebook down without much care. You're a baker's son. You don't know wood, you don't know customers, and you certainly don't know how to run a business. This will fail before it even opens. The words landed like a hammer on glass. Samuel didn't argue. He simply closed the notebook slowly, nodded once and said, Right, of course. Thank you for your honesty, Elias. He left without another word. Elias returned to his workbench, satisfied that he had once again spoken the truth plainly. He did not yet know how heavy that truth would become. Days turned to weeks. Elias noticed Samuel no longer passed by the workshop on his morning walks. The bakery, once filled with Samuel's warm greetings, now only offered a polite nod from his father. Then, one afternoon, Elias heard from a neighbor that Samuel had left for the city, taken a job as a shop clerk, folded away his notebook of dreams, and never spoke of woodworking again. Elias told himself it didn't matter. He had only spoken what was true. If Samuel couldn't handle honest words, that wasn't Elias's burden to carry. But that night, sanding down a chair leg alone in his quiet workshop, his hands slowed. His mind kept drifting back, not to his own words, but to Samuel's face in the exact moment he'd heard them. The light that had been in his eyes moments before, gone, like a candle pinched out between two fingers. For the first time in his life, Elias sat in his workshop long after the sun had set, not working, just sitting, thinking. Miriam found him there near midnight, the chair leg still unfinished in his hands. "You're still thinking about him, aren't you?" she asked softly. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Time moved the way it always does, quietly, but without pause. Elias grew older, his beard turned gray, his hands slower, though still steady enough to hold a chisel. He never forgot Samuel, though the town slowly did. New faces filled the market square. New dreams replaced old ones. One spring morning, a small boy named Toby wandered into Elias's workshop, curiosity written all over his dust-smudged face. "Are you really the best carpenter in the whole town?" the boy asked. Elias, without looking up from his work, replied, "I'm the only carpenter in this town." The boy laughed, and something about that laugh, light, unguarded, hopeful, reminded Elias of someone he hadn't let himself think about in a long while. Toby began visiting every day after that, watching Elias work, asking endless questions, until one day he worked up the courage to ask, "Will you teach me?" Elias studied the boy for a long moment. Then, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, even to himself, he said yes. Toby's first attempts at carpentry were honestly terrible. His joints didn't align, his cuts were crooked. The first stool he built wobbled so badly it could barely hold a cup of water, let alone a person. Old habits stirred inside Elias, the familiar urge to say exactly what he saw, plainly, without softness. "This is unusable. You're wasting good wood." But just as the words rose to his tongue, a memory surfaced. Samuel's notebook closing slowly, the light leaving his eyes, the empty bakery counter that followed for years after. Elias paused. He picked up the wobbling stool instead, turned it over in his weathered hands, and ran a thumb along its rough, uneven edge. "The shape is honest," he said finally, quietly. "The wood wanted to become something, and you helped it try. Let's just fix these edges together." Toby's face lit up exactly the way Samuel's once had, except this time, Elias didn't let that light go out. Day after day they worked side by side. Elias corrected gently. He praised what deserved praising and reshaped what needed reshaping, never crushing, only guiding. Toby returned every single day, not out of obligation, but because for the first time, being corrected didn't feel like being punished. Years passed. Toby grew from a curious, clumsy boy into one of the finest carpenters the region had ever known. His furniture, eventually more sought after than Elias's had ever been. But Toby never forgot the old man who had taught him not just how to shape wood, but how patience could shape a person. Elias, in his final years, finally understood what Miriam had tried to tell him decades ago, in a kitchen doorway, with worried eyes and a gentle voice. Truth doesn't need to be brutal to remain true. It only needs to be carried with care. Words are not just sounds passed from one mouth to another ear. They are weight, they are seeds, and depending on how they are planted, they can build a life, or quietly end one before it even begins. Elias never saw Samuel again. That regret stayed with him until his last day. But in Toby, he found a way to make sure the lesson didn't die with him. So the next time truth sits heavy on your tongue, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, am I saying this to help them grow, or just to prove that I am right? If this story reached something in you, stay a little longer. There are more tales like this one, waiting quietly to be told. Subscribe and join the journey.